disturb sign. I have spent 10 years working as a traveling auditor, which means I have slept in hundreds of hotels, from 5-star resorts to roadside motels that probably should have been condemned. You learn to ignore the weird smells and thin walls. But 3 years ago, at a mid-range chain hotel in suburban Ohio, I learned that the Do Not Disturb sign is not always there for the guest's privacy. Sometimes it is a warning. It was a Tuesday night, around 2:00 a.m. I was staying on the 4th floor, right at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. I was finishing up some spreadsheets when I heard a faint, rhythmic sound from the room next door, room 414. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy across the carpet. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Normally, I would just put in earplugs, but the sound was accompanied by a wet, slapping noise that made my skin crawl. I walked over to the shared wall and pressed my ear against it. The dragging stopped. Then I heard a muffled sob. It was not a child. It sounded like a grown man trying to keep his breath from hitching. I decided to call the front desk. The night clerk, a guy who sounded like he had been awake for 3 days straight, told me that room 414 was checked out to a single occupant who had requested absolute privacy and had not been seen for 2 days. He promised to send security up to do a welfare check. I waited by my door, peering through the peephole. A few minutes later, a lone security guard walked down the hall. He knocked on 414. No answer. He used his master key and pushed the door open. I expected to hear a shout or a confrontation. Instead, there was just silence. The guard stepped back out into the hall 10 seconds later. His face was a sickly shade of gray. He did not look at my door. He just bolted for the elevators, fumbling with his radio. My curiosity overrode my common sense. I opened my door just a crack. The door to 414 was still slightly ajar. The Do Not Disturb sign was hanging crookedly on the handle. I stepped into the hallway. The smell hit me first. It was metallic and sweet, like a butcher shop in the middle of July. I pushed the door open fully. The room was pristine, except for the bathroom. The bathtub was overflowing, but it was not with water. The dragging sound I would heard was not furniture. It was the guest. He was still alive, sitting on the floor, but he had systematically removed every single piece of furniture from the room, the desk, the chairs, even the mattress, and stacked them against the window so no one could see in. He had been cleaning the room with his own clothes until the fabric was gone. The most terrifying part was not the man or the room. It was what was written on the mirror in the steam of the overflowing tub. It said, "He is under the floorboards now." The police arrived and took the man away. He was having a severe psychotic break, but when they checked the floorboards, which were actually just concrete slabs covered in carpet, they found that someone had sliced the carpet in the corner of the room and tucked a collection of Polaroids underneath. The photos were of me, taken from the vent in the ceiling of my own room while I was sleeping the night before. I do not stay in hotels with vents near the bed anymore. Story 2. The Mezzanine Observer. there is a specific kind of silence that exists in a historic hotel lobby at 4 a.m. It is not peaceful. It feels heavy, like the building itself is holding its breath, straining under the weight of a century of secrets. I was 23 when I took the night auditor job at the St. Juliet, a grand, aging hotel in the heart of Savannah, Georgia. It was a place of fading opulence, all marble floors that felt like ice, massive velvet curtains that smelled of dust, and a mahogany mezzanine balcony that overlooked the entire lobby like a silent, wooden judge. My job was simple: stay behind the desk, audit the day's transactions, and ensure the massive front doors remained locked to anyone without a key. For the first few months, the only monsters I encountered were drunken wedding guests or the occasional eccentric tourist. But on a humid Thursday in mid-August, the atmosphere changed. The air in the lobby felt thick, charged with static I could not explain. Around 3:15 a.m., I felt that unmistakable prickle on the back of my neck, the biological warning that you are being watched. I looked up. The mezzanine was shrouded in shadows, the dim yellow wall sconces barely reaching the railing. But there, standing perfectly still, was a man. He was dressed in a tuxedo that looked 50 years out of date, wide lapels, a stiff white shirt, and a perfectly tied bow tie. He was not leaning on the railing. His hands were gripped, white-knuckled, on the mahogany. He was not looking at the lobby. He was looking directly into my eyes. I gave him a polite nod, the kind of professional mask you wear in hospitality. "Good morning, sir. Is there something I can help you with?" He did not move. He did not blink. The silence stretched until it felt like it was going to snap, just as I was about to reach for the security radio. He turned and stepped back into the darkness of the third-floor hallway. I watched the security monitors. The camera for the mezzanine showed the hallway was empty. There was no movement, no door closing. He had simply vanished. I tried to shake it off, blaming the long hours and the flickering lights. But 20 minutes later, a mechanical groan echoed through the lobby. It was the service elevator, a temperamental cage of iron located in a dark alcove behind the grand staircase. The indicator light was flickering. Basement. The basement of the St. Juliet is a labyrinth. It is a subterranean world of old boiler rooms, cold bins from the 1800s, and storage cages filled with Victorian furniture wrapped in plastic like corpses. It is not a place a guest should be, and it is certainly not a place someone should be at 3:30 a.m. I grabbed my heavy mag light and headed down. As the elevator doors creaked open into the basement, the smell hit me. It was not the usual scent of damp earth and grease. It was something sweet, like rotting flowers, mixed with the sharp tang of old copper. The air was cold, unnaturally cold for a Georgia summer. As I walked deeper into the storage tunnels, I heard a sound that made my blood stall. It was a low, rhythmic humming, a lullaby, tuneless and distorted by the echoes of the pipes. I followed the sound to the very back of the boiler room, to a section that had been walled off decades ago during a structural renovation. I rounded a stack of rusted radiators and shone my light. The man in the tuxedo was there, but he was not standing. He was on his knees, in the dirt, digging into the mortar of a brick wall with his bare hands. His tuxedo was shredded at the elbows, and his fingernails were gone, replaced by raw, bleeding fingertips that left red streaks on the gray stone. "Sir," I shouted, my voice cracking, "stop. You are hurt. We need to get you upstairs." He stopped humming, but did not turn around. His shoulders were heaving with a wet, ragged breath. "I almost have it," he whispered. His voice sounded like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "The manager told me to keep it hidden. He said the guests keep complaining about the scratching. He told me to make it quiet." I took a step back, my flashlight beam dancing across the wall. "What are you talking about? Who told you that?" He slowly turned his head. His face was a mask of grief and madness. His eyes were wide, the whites showing all the way around the pupils, bloodshot and staring. He pointed at the bricks he had been clawing at, the girl in room 302. She would not stop screaming for her father. I had to put her in the wall so the hotel could keep its 5-star rating. "Silence, it's a luxury, Marcus. Do not you know that?" The sheer conviction in his voice made me look at the wall. I saw a crack in the old mortar. Something was wedged inside, a piece of yellowed fabric. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pulled it. It was a small, silk hair ribbon, perfectly preserved in the dry air of the wall. I did not stay to hear the rest. I sprinted for the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs, and did not stop until I was out on the humid sidewalk of the street. I called the police from my cell phone, my breath coming in gasps. The police arrived within minutes. They found the man still in the basement, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, clutching the silk ribbon I had dropped. He did not resist. He did not even speak. But the real horror began when the forensic team arrived. The man was a local resident named Elias, a former historian who had suffered a complete mental break after losing his job. But in his pocket, they found a handwritten ledger from 1976, the personal diary of the hotel's manager from that era. The diary detailed the disappearance of the manager's own daughter, a scandal that had been hushed up to protect the St. Juliet's reputation. The police used sledgehammers to break through the wall Elias had been digging toward. Behind the brickwork, in a hollow space less than 2 feet wide, they found the skeletal remains of a young woman. She had been placed there sitting up, her hands folded in her lap. Beside her was a single silver tray, as if she were still being served. The most disturbing part, the forensic examiner determined that she had not died before being placed in the wall. She had been sealed in alive. Elias had not committed the crime. He was only 3 years old in 1976, but he had spent months obsessively researching the case until he believed he was the one who had done it. He had been checking into the hotel under different names for weeks just to get closer to that wall. I quit the St. Juliet that morning. I never went back for my final paycheck. Sometimes, when I am in a quiet building, I still hear that low, rhythmic humming, and I cannot help but wonder how many other 5-star reputations are built on the silence of the people hidden behind the wallpaper. Story 3, Room 101. Most people think the first floor of a motel is the safest because you are close to the exit. If there is a fire or a break-in, you have a straight shot to the parking lot. I used to be one of those people. I prioritized convenience and a quick getaway. But after what happened in a small, nameless town, 3 hours outside of Reno. I will never stay on the ground floor again. In fact, I rarely stay in motels at all. I was 10 days into a solo cross-country move, driving a U-Haul that felt like it was held together by prayer. By the time I hit the Nevada state line, my eyes were burning from the highway glare, and the caffeine was no longer working. I pulled into the first place I saw, a dilapidated L-shaped motel with a neon sign that just said motel in a flickering, sickly blue. The parking lot was a cracked sea of asphalt, empty except for a rusted-out white van with no windows parked near the far end. The lobby smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The manager was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of driftwood, leathery skin, a permanent scowl, and a glass eye that did not quite track with her real one. She did not ask for my $499, just cash. She handed me a heavy brass key with 101 stamped into it. It was the room directly adjacent to the office. The room was the definition of budget. A single queen bed with a floral polyester spread, a bolted-down cathode ray TV, and a single window that looked out onto the black void of the highway. I was too exhausted to care. I took a quick, lukewarm shower and climbed into bed, falling into a heavy, dreamless sleep almost immediately. But around 2:45 a.m., I was jolted awake, not by a loud noise, but by a sensation, a vibration. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was coming from directly behind the headboard. It sounded like fingernails on drywall, or maybe something sharper. I sat up, my heart thumping. I figured it was just desert rats in the walls. I balled up my fist and banged hard on the wood of the headboard. "Cut it out," I yelled. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy and unnatural. I sat up for 10 minutes, listening to the hum of the mini fridge. Just as I started to lay back down, the sound returned, but it was not scratching anymore. It was a low, mechanical whirring, accompanied by a rhythmic thudding against the wall. It felt like something was being pressed into the drywall right behind my skull. I turned on the bedside lamp, the yellow light casting long, jagged shadows. I climbed out of bed and with a massive effort shoved the heavy mattress and frame away from the wall. My breath hitched. There, exactly where my pillow had been resting, was a small, perfectly circular hole about the size of a quarter. It had not been punched through, it had been drilled. I do not know why I did it. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation, or maybe it was just a morbid instinct. I leaned forward, put my eye to the hole, and looked through. I expected to see the manager's office, or the guts of a utility closet. Instead, I saw a narrow, dimly lit corridor that should not have existed. And at the end of that corridor, less than 6 inches from my face, was a human eye. It was wide, unblinking, and reflecting the yellow light from my room. I screamed and fell backward, scrambling away from the wall. From the other side of the drywall, I heard a muffled, high-pitched giggle, followed by the sound of a heavy door clicking shut. I did not think. I grabbed my keys and my boots and ran for the door. I grabbed the handle and twisted. It would not move. I tried the deadbolt, but it was already turned to the open position, yet the door felt like it had been welded shut. Someone had bolted it from the outside. I spun around to the window, my only other exit. My heart dropped. The rusted white van from the parking lot had been moved. It was now backed up flush against my window, the rear doors pressing against the glass. I was completely boxed in. Then, the landline phone on the nightstand began to ring. It was a sharp, piercing sound that made me jump. I let it ring 5 times before I picked up. I did not say hello. "You have a very nice profile," the manager's voice crackled over the line. She sounded different, excited. "But you moved the bed, honey. That was not part of the arrangement. We like to watch the dreams happen." Before I could respond, a terrifying sound erupted from the wall. A power saw, a reciprocating saw, plunged through the drywall where the small hole had been. The serrated blade began to rip through the plaster, moving in a wide, jagged circle. They were not just watching anymore, they were coming through. Adrenaline is a hell of a thing. I looked at the TV bolted to the dresser. I grabbed the base with both hands and pulled with everything I had, the screws screaming as they tore out of the cheap particle board. I hauled the heavy unit into the bathroom and swung it like a battering ram into the tiny frosted window above the toilet. The glass shattered. I did not care about the shards. I hauled myself up, my skin tearing on the frame, and squeezed through the narrow opening. I fell into the dry dirt behind the motel, my arms bleeding, and I did not look back. I sprinted toward the highway, waving my arms like a madman until a semi-truck slammed on its brakes. When the state troopers arrived an hour later, the motel was dark. The manager was gone. The van was gone. When they breached room 101, they found the circular hole in the wall was finished. It led to a hidden, soundproof chamber built into the center of the motel block. It was filled with high-end recording equipment, monitors, and thousands of labeled tapes. The real owner of a motel was found 2 days later in the industrial freezer in the kitchen. He would been dead for a week. The woman with the glass eye had just stepped into his life, using the motel as a collection gallery. They never found her, and they never found the van. Now, every time I check into a hotel, the first thing I do is pull the bed away from the wall, because you never know who is waiting for the arrangement to begin.